Zig has a question about Obamacare and unity in Congress. Zig, you're on the line with Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Senator Lee. My question, I have two of them, if I may, please. The first question I have is, why did Congress pass a bill to end the Affordable Care Act without having a better plan in place? If this had passed, there would have been people left without any insurance whatsoever.
Go ahead and ask your second question, Zig, and then I'll answer both of them.
The second question is, you discussed reforming a broken legislative process. I'm not sure what's broken. It worked well before. Is it perhaps the process or the radical polarization we're seeing, or might it be something else? And thank you.
Okay, Zig, thank you for both of your questions. Your first question relates to the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. This is a law that from its very inception, from the moment it was passed, from the moment it was enacted by a group of lawmakers who had never read it, who were told that they had to vote for it in order to find out what was in it. This is a law that has never enjoyed the support of a majority of the American people. And if anything, Zig, the popularity of this law has suffered even more since it took effect, for the simple reason that it has made healthcare less affordable and less accessible for millions of Americans. It has separated millions of Americans from trusted healthcare providers. Although Americans were promised that if they liked their health insurance, they could keep their health insurance, that promise turned out to be hollow. And the fact is that this law has caused premiums to skyrocket. It's caused deductibles to skyrocket. It has limited coverage. And so yes, I did vote, and I enthusiastically supported, in fact was a driving force behind the effort to repeal Obamacare. Now, we understood at the time that this president wasn't going to be enthusiastic about this idea. We understood that he would likely, as he did, predictably veto this legislation. Now, it was wrong on his part. We had plans in place so that we could phase it out so that people wouldn't be left on the hook. But just the same, we do need to repeal this law because this law is bad. Now, we have a number of proposals to replace Obamacare. And keep in mind, I'm not advocating a return to exactly the system that we had in place before Obamacare. You see, we did have a failing system even before Obamacare for the simple reason that free market forces were not allowed to operate. Unfortunately, Obamacare made that even worse. And what has happened as a result is that healthcare, again, has become less accessible and even less affordable. Right now, there are a number of proposals percolating that use free market forces to put individual Americans in charge of their own healthcare decisions. You see, I believe healthcare decisions need to be made by patients in consultation with their doctors rather than by government bureaucrats in Washington. And that, unfortunately, the latter, unfortunately, has become the norm under Obamacare. So yes, I did support that, and I will continue to support repealing Obamacare and moving toward a more free market-oriented system, an even more free market-oriented system than what we had beforehand. That, and only that, will drive down prices for patients throughout America and put patients back in charge of their own healthcare decisions. As to the broken process and how it needs to be reformed, look, you're exactly right. There is a certain broken quality to the process we have here in Washington. You can call it the product of polarization, and there is some polarization, to be sure. I think it is exaggerated from time to time, or perhaps it is at least not as well explained as it ought to be. Let me explain what I mean. We didn't get to be $19 trillion in debt without a whole lot of people, Democrats and Republicans alike, agreeing way too easily, way too quickly that they ought to get there. So although there is a significant amount of polarization in Washington, that's not the only aspect of the system that is broken or that's not working well or that needs to be fixed. Let me explain what I mean. Just a few weeks ago, shortly before Christmas, we were presented with a spending bill for the federal government that was 2,242 pages long. It took us about 40 minutes just to print it out using a fairly fast printer. We were given about 48 hours to review that legislation. before we were called upon to vote on it. Now, I made a commitment to voters throughout Utah when I first ran for office that if I were given a piece of legislation, my default vote would be no, meaning unless they gave me enough time to review it, to get to the point where I understood what I was voting on, I would vote no. I nonetheless feel an obligation, regardless of how I intend to vote, to try to review it before the vote occurs. And so I, along with my staff, began diving into this legislation. We spent that 48-hour period very aggressively combing through the fine details of this bill. In the end, I saw a lot of problems with it. And one of the biggest problems with it was that it was presented to us as a one-size-fits-all, take it or leave it, binary choice. We were told either pass this spending bill, which spent between $1 and $2 trillion, depending on how you evaluate the price tag attached to it. Either you vote for it and take all that goes along with it. Take the fact that it was chock full of all kinds of things that a lot of people find objectionable, funding bad programs and in some cases supporting crony capitalist causes throughout America. Or you vote against it. And no one had the opportunity to improve it. There were amendments that could have passed, that would have passed, that I would have offered, that others would have offered, had we been given any opportunity to do so. But you know what happened? You had 4 members of Congress, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat from the House, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat from the Senate, who got together behind closed doors. And over the course of days or weeks, they hammered out this 2,242-page bill. As a result of that, all but these 4 members of Congress, all but 2 members of the 100-member Senate, and all but 2 members of the 435-member House of Representatives were excluded from that process. The worst part of that, Zig, is the fact that that means that roughly 300 million Americans were disenfranchised, were shut out of that process because they had no say, because their elected senators and representatives had no say. That's what I'm referring to when I talk about a problem that is really a long-standing one. When I talk about a system that's in need of reform, that's a part of the problem that unfortunately has nothing to do with partisan gridlock. Again, there is a partisan divide that exists, to be sure, but this is a problem that's much worse than that in many ways. This is a problem that has been created by both Republicans and Democrats. This is a problem that is neither Republican nor Democratic, neither liberal nor conservative. It is simply an American issue. And I'd invite you to join with me in calling upon representatives and senators, Republicans and Democrats alike, to abandon this process, to restore a true process, one that will allow more Americans to actually have an impact on legislation before it's considered and voted into law.